Okay, welcome to the 6th common session of SunoikisisDC Digital Classics 2016. Today we have three guests. We have Marie-Claire Beaulieu from Tufts University, Gabriel Bodard from the Institute of Classical Studies in London, and Pietro Liuzzo from Heidelberg University. I want just to say that yesterday I had the possibility to present SunoikisisDC Digital Classics at the second day of the European Association of Digital Humanities at DHD 2016 here in Leipzig, so I could present the program. People were happy, and I think that next year we will have new people and new countries joining the program. But now we can start with the common session. So the common session today is about annotation and alignment of text and objects. Last week we started working with XML and Epidoc, so using specific standards for marking up text, and we also have a specific use case for working with non-alphabetic text, Messinian tablets. But today we are going to see how an overview to annotate and align text and objects. So welcome to our guests, and I think that Gabby from London can start.
Okay, thank you, Monica. So if just a second to grab the slides. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, yes.
Cool, thanks. So, yes, thanks, and very happy to present this topic. I'm just going to give a quick overview of the session, and then a quick outline of what we mean by annotation and alignment and why we do it. I'll try to be very brief with that, because we then have the three main parts of this, which are going to be the information-bearing parts of this class, which we'll move on to as quickly as possible. So Marie-Claire will talk about the Perseids text-image alignment tool. Pietro will talk about the Eagle Wikimedia Commons tool for identification and annotation of inscriptions, and then Marie-Claire and I will talk a little bit about the Flickr image annotation exercise, which Marie-Claire will probably talk most about, because she's done this work with her students already in the past. So I'll, as I say, very quickly give an overview of what we mean by annotation and alignment. So annotation of a digital text is essentially identification of features in those texts. This can include, for example, the tagging of named entities, as we talked about 2 weeks ago. It can also include the tagging of grammatical and linguistic information, as we talked about in the tree banking sessions a couple of weeks before that. It can also mean annotating semantic links between tagged entities in the text and people and places and other kinds of entities that have existence in digital form outside of the text. Perhaps most interesting, annotation can also include links to other texts, so links either between parts of the same text or links to completely different text, showing that texts are, for example, have relationships with one another. They've been copied, they've been translated, they've had influence transferred between them. This is the sort of thing that the text reuse projects do when annotating relationships between texts, and also linking the different parts, the different types of representation of a text. So photographs, drawings, editions, translations, and so forth. I'll give examples of all of these very quickly. Annotating to record variant readings and conjectures, apparatus criticus type of annotation, and also annotating to add commentary to a text are also the sorts of things that one might do when adding annotations to a text. So this is a slide we showed 2 or 3 weeks ago when we talked about named entity annotation. This is one example of annotation where we have a text and we highlight the bits of text we want to annotate, and those annotations have meaning. If you remember, the blue annotations are people, the red ones are places, and the solid ones are direct references through proper names, and the hollow ones are indirect or speculative annotations of places without names. Another annotation that we saw a couple of weeks ago was this sort of annotation of not just saying this is a name, but this is a link to disambiguate that name. This is a particular person referred to in a particular text. And so the Pelagios and Snapdragon annotations of the kind we talked about 2 weeks ago are an example of that. Apparatus criticus, as I mentioned a moment ago, is another kind of annotation. So in this text, this is a text marked up using the papyri.info tool, which some of you will have used after last week's session. Effectively, what this is the human readable view, but those of you who used it will know that behind this tool, behind this view, there is the markup view where each variant reading, in this case they're variant speculative readings rather than readings that are attested in different sources, but the principle is the same, which is represented in the text above by a little blue star, are marked up with annotations to say one edition reads X and another edition reads Y, and this is represented by putting the most recent edition's version in the text and the older edition's version in the apparatus as an annotation on that. Another kind of annotation, also using papyri.info as an example, is the commentary. So here is a piece of text. It's not the same text. This is a text picked at random, and someone's decided to annotate the name Heraclides on line 6 by saying some sort of historical commentary on that person's name in that interface. So these are all kinds of annotation that one makes on a digital text. The second kind of annotation that we're going to talk about in this session is, well, that we're going to talk about mostly in this session, in fact, is annotation to indicate alignment between either different parts of a text or between texts in different places. So linking individual lines and words between two different versions of the same text, as we saw in the apparatus there. Sometimes there are multiple readings. Sometimes if two versions of a text are so different that rather than just pointing out the few places where they differ, we might want to just give the two versions and show those places where they align to make it easier to see the relationships between them. Likewise, aligning from a text to a translation is a form of annotation which can be very useful, both for pedagogical purposes, making it easier to study a text, but also to study the relationship between text and between the words and the translations in various languages, and these sorts of alignments can happen in various sizes. You can have a translation which aligns from one word to one word, or you can have a translation which simply aligns by an entire sentence. If the translation is maybe slightly looser, or if you don't think it's meaningful to say exactly which word translates to which word in Latin translates to one word in English, because translations aren't that close. Aligning text to an image, again, is something you can see various uses for. This can be done at various levels. You can align a large chunk of text to a particular part of an image. You can align a particular line or individual word. You can even align individual letters to individual squares on the image for perhaps paleographical interest. And you can align and you can annotate an image for alignment either by simply drawing squares or other simple polygons on it and saying the part I'm interested in is in this area, or by tracing the exact outlines of a letter in SVG, for example, in order to computationally handle that shape. And there's also the slightly more complex issue of aligning texts that are not they're not contiguous. So that texts that are not when the two texts that are being aligned are not the same shape, if you like. So one may be a lot larger than the other, or it may be divided by other intervening text or so forth. So there's aligning between two texts that are not just as simple as saying this 3 words here represents these 4 words here, but a slightly more complex relationship. So a couple of examples here. We talked about aligning between the various different versions of a text. These are just 4 of what are in fact several possible versions of a single inscription. There's the photograph of the stone that bears the inscription. There's a drawing reconstructed of the stone that bears the inscription with its statue, which is no longer attached to it. There's a diplomatic transcription. There's an editorial transcription. You could also visualize the semantic XML. You could also have a translation. You could also have multiple translations in different languages for different purposes. And aligning between these various versions of the text is quite useful in order for us to be able to indicate explicitly that they're all related in some way. They all relate back to the same original text. Here's an example of texts aligned between translations in various languages, all aligned at the word level, as we talked about. This very explicit. This is very useful for helping to study vocabulary and translations of vocabulary between languages, and in some ways, it's a more intelligent way of studying vocabulary than simply looking in a dictionary. Another way of aligning texts is this workflow designed by the SOURCE project, the Sharing Ancient Wisdoms project, which talks about the relationships between various different texts that some of which are exact copies or translations of others, some of which are loose paraphrases, some of which are in some way influenced by but clearly not quite the same text, and so forth. And so there's a whole vocabulary, a whole ontology there of the kinds of relationships that text fragments have to other text fragments. And so that's a very interesting form of annotation. And image annotation, I won't talk in much detail about this because this is an example that Marie-Claire is going to talk about in a minute. But just as a way of annotating a particular part of a image of an inscription and aligning it to the text transcription in XML of that same part of the inscription. And here's another example of what's essentially the same thing, but for a paleographical interest. This is from the Digipal project in London, where a medieval Latin or possibly in this case Anglo-Saxon text is being annotated for comparison of different forms of the same letter. So for example, the A's and the N's in this text are being pulled out and extracted so they can be compared later in another interface. And so finally, just a few points giving suggestions of why we might annotate and align texts. This is something which will be picked up throughout this session, really, so I won't go into it in great detail here, but we annotate as a way of adding commentary, as a way of adding functionality to our publication of the texts that and images that we're annotating. The annotations can also be used as a gold standard for machine learning, for example, for the named entity recognition learning algorithms that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and for tree banking algorithms and so forth. We can also be building a network of relationships which can then be queried on, or on which machine reasoning can be performed on. And we can be used to create links between the various projects that the texts are coming from. We're talking this interoperability that we talk about every single time, every single week in this session so far, where projects that use similar standards can therefore work together, and that's exactly what these sorts of annotations build on. Finally, the act of annotating and aligning texts in a machine-readable way is, I would argue, is an essential component of the transparent and replicable publication of digital research. So it's the one thing that turns our ill-defined thought processes. So I may be an expert and I can tell you that this is a 3rd century alpha, but the act of having annotated multiple images of this sort of thing actually gives you scientific data rather than just my impression. So it's basically making a scientifically replicable footnote, if you like, to the conclusions we've drawn on this sort of data. So annotation is actually essential to making digital publication, proper academic publication rather than speculative and just to take my word for it kind of statements. So I'll finish there. I'll hand over to Mary Claire, who's going to talk a bit more about that Perseids tool that we that I mentioned briefly, and we'll come back to a lot of these same issues throughout the hour, I think.
Great. Thanks, Gabby, and thanks Monica. So I would like to show you the little workflow that we're doing to do precisely what was just described. That is, aligning text with images. So I'm going to grab a little Perseids window here, and I'm going to demonstrate this with manuscripts because that's currently what my students are doing. So here I have a manuscript of Valerius, oh, that's not Valerius Maximus, that is...
Marie-Claire, I think you have to share the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I know that.
It says to me that I'm presenting to everyone.
Yes, yes, but you also have to share the screen so that we can see your desktop. I know, yeah.
Okay, so something's happening.
Yes. And then I don't know if you are, you have slides. No, I think you have Perseids. So, okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
Can you guys see a Perseids window now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to choose my manuscript here. So these are manuscripts that are preserved in our library here at Tufts. So I'm going to choose Valerius Maximus. That happens to be something I like. So as you can see, Perseids just here created a new publication. For those who might not know what Perseids is, it's an editing and annotation platform that is nested within the Perseids digital library and allows us, in a nutshell, to create and manipulate things, texts and objects that are in Perseids, or that can be later put into Perseids. So here I've got my publication created, and I want to do some XML. This process here is going to be the transcription of my manuscript. So I'm going to click on my image, and if you want to do this, if you want to try it, feel free to use any of the manuscripts or inscriptions that we have already listed. If you want to work on your own text, we have to load it. We have to load it into Perseids first. So contact us, and we can help you get set up. So how does that process work? This is a piece of software that we integrated from the Homer Multitext. It's the image. It's a tool called ImageSpect that's built upon the image citation tool. So how it works is simply that you draw regions of interest around words. And here I'm doing words because that happens to be something that answers my research question. But if somebody wanted to do characters, as Gabby showed earlier, that could be done. It could be done by line or whatever else is the object of interest, right? So in this particular case, words. So here I'm going to have 3 regions of interest. I could have more. It's just for the purpose of demonstration. So I'm simply going to type what I see, right? Oops, sorry. Right. So I've got this, and what's happening in the screen here is you can see that the computer calculated the coordinates of that region of interest in my image. And so that calculation turns into a facts attribute, right, which I'm going to copy and put in my document. So I'm going to go here and paste that. So at this point, I've got the word de. And if I save this, you can see that I get a green light. If I save this, I'm going to preview now. And you can see that the word de is in my preview. And we have it, we have the region of interest here that's linked, and it's also shown in context here so I can see where it is on the document. And so, as Gabby said previously, this makes my work completely transparent. If someone were to disagree with me about this transcription, they could go straight back to the original and see for themselves, right? They could also suggest a correction and so forth, right? So we can also see that this has been assigned a stable identifier, which is here, and then of course that's machine actionable, and I can do some further work with that identifier. What else did I want to show you? So let's say I'm ready to submit this to my community. In this particular case, my community is medieval Latin, if I can just find it. So we've got Tufts Medieval Latin here. So let's say I'm ready to submit this either to my instructor if I'm in a class, or to my collaborators if I'm a researcher working in a team. I'm going to say a little message and submit it to the board. Now, because I'm also on the board for that, I will show you the process, right? Because Perseids took from the papyri.info team this piece of software that is called Sosol. So what we built from Sosol, or what we took from Sosol, is this review workflow. So I will show you how that works in a second. So here I have to use another identity, right, to log into this board, which is what I just did. So here is my publication that I just submitted. We know it's only one word, but that doesn't matter. So I'm the reviewer here. I can decide to preview, so I can see what I did, and I think that's great. I can also look over here at the XML. Let's say that I wanted to see how the encoding has been done, or the markup, or whatever. I have it right here. So I think that's great. I can either decide to return to revise, make some comments, or I can just accept it, in which case then this goes into the Perseids publication and will be publicly available. If I returned it, the user would get an email saying, here are the comments that the reviewer put. Please go make those changes and resubmit to the board. So are there any questions, or do we want to move on?
I don't see questions in the chat or in the Google Plus community. So we can go on.
Sure.
I think, well, I can add one thing. This tool is, well, you're using this with students, so this is a perfect example of teaching students how to work with objects and to produce research. I think that Perseids is a perfect example. So how students can produce research, because they learn to be responsible for annotations, and they publish something. This is a sort of micro publication. So you annotate, and this is a manuscript. So you are responsible. I think this is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also what we are trying to do in Sunoikis, so to integrate teaching and research, and so that students learn to produce research, to produce data. So I think we can go on.
Thanks, Monica. I completely agree with what you said.
Okay, shall I pick it up from here?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to share my screen to show some slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes, yes.
So I'm going to speak about the work on aligning text translations and images that has been done during the Eagle project, for which I've worked from the University of Heidelberg. The Eagle project is about aggregating big databases of inscriptions, Greek and Latin inscriptions, but especially Latin inscriptions. And so the examples will be mainly epigraphic examples. One first example of the usefulness of aligning content and annotating them with alignment information is the disambiguation and identification of text, and especially of multiple online edition in our case. Different databases might have different editions of one inscription, which were made at different point in time, and we have aligned them for the Eagle portal access with a Trismegistos ID, which you see as the second field in this small form, which allows us also to show in different tabs 3 different editions of that same text, which are already available online, but people might not know that there are other 2 editions when they see one of them. If instead these texts are aligned, they can be displayed together, and the researcher and the user can just switch from one to the other and see what the differences are, and perhaps get a little bit more diverse information, and then go to each individual source to see what's actually in that full record. This is a simple example. Another, perhaps more interesting idea of what alignment can bring to is identifying objects which do not have an identification that is useful for research purposes. For example, there are plenty of images of inscriptions which have been uploaded to several places online which have not been identified. So we know perhaps that there is a photo of an inscription. We know where it comes from, perhaps we know who's the photographer, but we might not know what inscription it actually represents. In Wikimedia Commons, there is a large amount of these photos. Some have been uploaded by contributors to the Eagle project, like this one in this example, which present this situation. But being Wikimedia Commons a completely open project, an editable project, the information there can be more easily updated than in other archives and databases. So it is then possible for a user, for example, to take this image, download it, stick it into the image search of the Eagle portal, for example, and see what the similarity between other images of inscriptions which are already in the database brings, and perhaps identify which text, which inscription is photographed in that photo, and then go back to that record in Wikimedia Commons and edit it to add such category of information. This becomes very useful because the Wikimedia community has got a huge amount of effort being put from volunteers into organizing these photos and contents in a useful way also for researchers. Some of you might be surprised to find out how many well-categorized inscriptions and photo of inscriptions there are in Wikimedia Commons. And so adding a category in there helps not just the identification of that single image, but can then be connected to a wealth of other images of that inscription and text and translation, so that the richness of information becomes higher, not just for that single photo, but for any other tool that is using such a resource. Another example, always from the Eagle project work, is the one about alignment of translations with transcription of texts. It is a well-known issue that there aren't that many translations, but it is also true that there are translations out there which, as the photos that we've seen in the previous example, aren't linked to the text that they translate in a proper way and in a reusable way. For Eagle, we have set up a very famous piece of software, which is a simple media wiki, powering it with Wikibase extension, which is the same thing that powers Wikidata, and makes the media wiki actually a triple store database. We don't store a lot of information in here, but we just store identifiers and the translations, which is very simple in a way, but very powerful, because it allows alignment. Because from one single point in which we gather these translations, several instances can access the data and find that specific kind of data and enrich their resources wherever they are with this kind of input. And please notice that we also integrate with Perseids, and therefore this operation can be done in the very same way in which that Marie-Claire has just shown. In this example, there is an inscription from the Attic Inscriptions Online project, which has a traditional identifier and points to a record in the Attic Inscriptions Online project, which has only translations and no text, although it links to PHI where a text of the inscription can be found. We store that PHI ID because it's more likely that that is the ID that other projects store, and can help to link back to the text that they have of that inscription. And we also store an ID that is provided by the Integrating Digital Epigraphies project in Duke, which will allow people to access a wealth of organized information about an object, including well-organized bibliographical references information. This means that there is a place in which these basic information are to be found, and there can be many more translations in many different languages, which anyone can enter into the wiki as it would do to edit a wiki page on Wikipedia, and they can be used in other resources. We can take another example, which is from a translation into a project which is published independently online, which is the Roman Inscriptions of Britain. This translation is replicated into the wiki, and from the API of the wiki, the Eagle portal can show the translation, and for example, also the epigraphic database in Heidelberg can pull the very same translation. This is similar to what happens when resources are linked with the annotation that Pelagius offers to resources. Also is much simpler and is not a fully linked open data system. Is a simple workflow to manage this information, which can be reused in this way. But it demonstrates in another way how the one simple operation like entering an ID and aligning one ID with another and a translation with an ID can turn out to be extremely valuable to a number of different projects which can reuse that information easily. Another example of the importance of alignment in dealing with epigraphy is in cases in which there is not enough space into an edition or in a print or digital edition to say all what can be said about the text. I'll give you some examples. In this case, for example, we've got an inscription which is often published, and we've got several editions online of the text. But the actual information about this inscription is given by the whole object. Without the image on top there, we never know that this guy, Mnemonius, is actually a blacksmith, which means that the alignment between the image and the full text and the full image of the text is very important to give exact information. Another case is case in which, like in this late antique inscription, there are overlapping texts which can share letters between them. And in this case, we want, we could align to portion of the image to show where a particular text is, although they might overlap. And therefore have an addition which points, in each case, to the region of the text as it appears that we want to edit. And so help very much the understanding of what we are talking about. And of course, in here as well, it could be very valuable to align letter by letter, as in this case, although a paragraphic description of what's going on, it's not to be excluded, and instead might find in here material to be more clear. Another further case is a case in which there are texts that overlap each other, like in this case where there is an inscription which is written in the form of another inscription, which is in this case a Kiro symbol. Another simple example, which has been already mentioned, is aligning different languages in an inscription which might be laid out in a different way from the one we can lay it out into a print or digital edition, which is usually a continuous one. For example, in this trilingual inscription, we could have an identification of where the different languages are and which portion of which language translates which block of text for each information, so that it can be represented into digital edition with much more power of clarity about what is being told about. Another minimal example, similar to the previous one, is annotating variant forms of a particular letter in a script. This is an archaic inscription from Latium, and in this case it would be very useful to align each letter to the different standard glyphs that are provided, for example, in a transcription, which might be already variants of a letter, but it is very rare to find that many examples of a variant, and instead having the individual variants for one individual text represented in the way that they are carved in the stone, because there is a piece of an image that can be aligned to the text, might be very valuable to study the actual variation of these symbols through time and in one corpus of inscriptions. Another example is the one of graffiti. Graffiti can be very big, very small, and that's very difficult also to photograph, as you can see in this example. I've aligned in a way the actual graffito with a box on the photo, and you can see that is a very small thing in there. And therefore, it's very useful in this case as well to have an alignment to the exact portion of the image where the text is, but also, as the Ancient Graffiti project does, put it into its context and then declare which actual wall in a house onto a map it refers to, so that it is also put in context. This website is now live, and you can go and click on the single room and then see on which wall and in which point of the wall this inscription, this graffito occurs. And this is the little map of one house. A last example of the usefulness of aligning text and images is done on the same line of the previous example by Marie Claire, but is on a manuscript that I'm editing currently. Is a piece of a manuscript from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. I'm editing one of the texts that are in this manuscript, which is the Aristodemus, so-called Aristodemus fragment. But when I align this page to the text that I want to edit, actually, I'm giving false information, because this page contains two texts, and it is indicated by this very tiny little sign into the page. In here, the word ends, and then from Gegraphane, the other word begins and the other text begins. So only this part of the page is actually the text that I'm editing, while the second part of the page is another text, the Vita Polloni of Philostratus. So as demonstrated from Marie-Claire, I should be aligning actually only the first part of the page to say that I'm editing that part of manuscript. And I could also demonstrate by alignment of the different parts to the different texts what's happening into the manuscript, and so give useful codicological informations about what's going on in these pages. And then I want to show these images in a way in which they are useful for other alignments as well, and for other purposes. And to do this, I can do I can use a IIIF protocol. I'm using the example of the graffiti that I used before, because via this protocol, the image can be served with a URL, and from this URL, I can just display the image and let the user play with it, or I can just point to that image, turn it around, always just changing the URL, or changes color scale and do all sorts of things with it for my web presentation and for my digital edition, very simply. I think I'm done with my part. These are credits for what I've said.
Okay, thank you, Pietro. I think that here we have seen, well, of course, other examples of aligning text and objects, annotating, but I think another important thing, how to integrate different resources. This is very important for our work. So different tools, well, different websites. So this is another fundamental things when working. And I know that this is one of the goals of Eagle, so integrating different databases, collections. This is another important thing. We have to learn to work with this, especially humanists. I think to learn.
It's yeah. From every little collaboration, there is a lot coming out that one could build many more interesting projects and research work on. It's always a good practice.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if Gabby, maybe it's...
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, so I'll no, absolutely. I think it was very useful to see that in between the two slightly more theoretical discussions of how we might go about annotating individual images or objects, because this Pietro showed us what we then do with these things and what the value of this is and what the outcome will be. So that was very valuable. Just a second to screen share again. So what's happened there? Okay, can you see the Flickr page
yes.
now? Yeah, okay. So if anyone's already downloaded the PDF slides for this session, there's a link to this to these search results at this point in the slides. But if not, just go to the Flickr website, and if you go to Advanced Search, here you can say to search in tags, and then simply search for the expression Greek inscription, or if you want to see something slightly different, search for Latin inscription and see what you come up with, and so you'll be able to follow along what I'm showing here. So I'm just going to show here quickly is a project to annotate photographs of inscriptions in this this public image sharing website, Flickr, which I'm sure you've all seen, and ways in which this annotation is then leveraged to extract information in a very similar way to the Wikimedia example that Pietro just showed. So I'll first show an example of an inscription that's already been annotated, and then I'll find another inscription in here and I'll annotate it in front of you. So for a first example, there are several inscriptions. You'll see there are something like 1,100 or 1,200 photographs in Flickr that are tagged as Greek inscriptions. Currently, there will be many more photographs of Greek inscriptions, of course, that just haven't been tagged that way because the person who uploaded it, that may not have been why they were interested in whatever it was they photographed. And not all of these will actually be photographs of Greek inscriptions. Some of them are photographs of other things that have been tagged that way with a slightly different meaning or connotation, perhaps. QED, for example, I'm not sure why that's been tagged as a Greek inscription, but that's an issue with a public site, of course. I'm just going to use one of my photographs as an example, although it wasn't me who annotated it. So I uploaded this photograph here, which is a photograph of that I took in the Archaeological Museum in Bulgaria, and I took it because it's a Greek inscription. And I didn't know what Greek inscription it was. I didn't have a chance to look up and annotate all the dozens, or if not hundreds, of photographs of Greek inscriptions that I took in that on that trip. I just uploaded them all to Flickr, sort of for interest, thinking that there will be pictures of Greek inscriptions up that people can look at. And so so I uploaded this, and someone else, someone by the name of Sozinkirch, has in fact annotated this inscription, and all they've done to annotate it is they've left a comment on the photograph in Flickr, and in this comment they've done three things. They've said just in plain text what the reference to this inscription is. It's IG Bulg 42315. They've also added a HTML link to the page in the Packard epigraphy database, which transcribes and describes that inscription. So that was nice. That was useful for anyone who's interested in this. That's they can go there for that. And they've, in the third line there, they've added what's called a machine tag. This is something that the Flickr API recognizes and enables you to search for in very specific ways. This is what they will be leveraged for this purpose by the Integrating Digital Epigraphies project that Pietro has already mentioned at Duke. And this is simply the name of the protocol. In this case, the protocol is PHI. That's the Packard Humanities Institute database that we just looked at. And then there's simply the property text, and then the number, which is the number of that text in that database. That's the same number, incidentally, that Pietro described the Ego database as storing as the value of as the identifier for an inscription. And you'll notice this same number 152145 is also in the URL there that to the link to Packard. So this is an annotated text. It's as simple as that. They've added a comment, and they put a machine tag in that comment, which will allow someone who has information about text 152145 to search Flickr to see if anyone has tagged any photographs of that inscription. And if they have, they can add this photograph to their online database of texts, which might not currently have any photographs in it. And because I've released this photograph under a Creative Commons license, I've allowed them to do this. Let me just quickly show another example of that at work. If we go back into my search results here, I will find an inscription that looks nice and easy to read. This one looks nice and easy to read. This is, I'm not sure why the slideshow keeps popping up in front of my screen share here, but I'm not sure there's anything I can do about that. So here's the inscription, and the first few words of that seems to say Epi Abdallah something else. That's probably enough. That's unlikely. So I'll go now. This is to the front page of the Packard Humanities Institute. I will search for Epi Abdallah, and press enter, and it finds this Epi Abdallah Ma'awi Amer. I'll look back at my photograph and see it does look rather like that is exactly the inscription we have here. This is it. This is an inscription from Gadara. If we look further down here, this in fact says the same thing. So this looks like I've identified the right inscription. So I'll do similar to what the Sozinkirch did to this. I will take the I'll put in a link to this. This is just to put in text. So I'll say this inscription And then I will just add the machine tag as we did before, which was PHI colon text equals, and then this 6-digit number. And I'll simply add that as a comment. So it's as simple as that. You find the image, you identify the image in a database. That can be in PHI or it could be in one of the Eagle databases, and then you add a machine tag and a link in the comment on that inscription. Now it's always possible that the person who uploaded this photograph will not like the fact that I've commented on it, and they'll delete my comment. They can do that. It's a shame if they do, because we're adding value to it by putting that comment there, but we can't stop them doing that. That's, again, it's a public site of that kind. But basically the act of annotating on here is as simple as that. So I'll hand over to Marie-Claire in a second to talk a little bit more about the project she's been doing in the same along the same lines. But essentially, the one of the exercises that we propose for this session, for that students might want to do, is just simply to go into Flickr and look for Greek inscriptions, Latin inscriptions, manuscripts, whatever, and annotate them in exactly this way, and then see what those annotations are. And sometimes, you know, the user, the person whose image you're annotating, will interact with you in some way in response to that, either in a good way by thanking you, or in a bad way by deleting your comment and reporting you for spam. But either way, you can get you know, some useful interaction from that. So Marie-Claire, do you want to talk about a different example?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So yeah, as Gabby said, we took this up in my Greek class last fall, and the purpose here is that we wanted to really recontribute to that community. So my students chose a variety of Greek inscriptions on Flickr, and here I'm going to show 3 different ones. So there was this one, and this. And so some of them had already been tagged, so we can see.
Marie-Claire, sorry for interrupting you. I think you have to share again the screen.
Oh.
No, I know. There are too many things.
Let me. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
Okay. So, are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So my students chose various inscriptions. There's 3 of them. This one, and this one. Some of them had already been tagged by Sosen Kirch, as you can see. This person had posted this picture and actually gave information about various catalogs in which this information is found, and also the museum number in the Epigraphical Museum at Athens. So Sosen Kirch tagged it and gave us a little link to the transcription of it in FIO, and here apparently we have a little broken link or something. And here is my student provided a translation, and also provided a link to their transcription in Perseids. So we can see here a translation done in Epidoc with a link to the image. So we're adding further value here by providing a nice marked up text of the inscription and an image alignment. So another student took this inscription, and so the user had given some information where they got this, and here's my student giving a link to the Packard site and a translation. And as Gabby described, sometimes we have really nice interactions with people, so here this user was very happy to have this translation. My third example is this one, from the same user actually as the earlier one. We can see that Sosen Kirch already linked to this, and here's my student offering a translation and an edition in Perseids again with markup. So in this case, right, so somebody can see the image alignment, but you could also look at their XML of it. You could add to the markup, and since this is all under Creative Commons, of course, you could download it and reuse it for your own research project. So that's about what I had to show. I will say that this really worked super well in terms of pedagogy. My students were really excited to do this and really excited to contribute to an active community, which I think is an important value of all the projects we presented here, right? So being open access, open source is really about, it's about contributing, it's about fostering a community of users around the world who can use this information. So the students were excited, and they also felt like they learned a lot in this process, because this is really epigraphy in the wild, as it were, right? So you have to solve a problem that's unique to this particular document. So if, I don't know if there are questions.
Can I ask a quick question, Marie-Claire?
Yes, of course.
So in the case that you just shown, are the images that are being annotated in Perseids, did they have to be uploaded into Perseids as well, or were they taken directly from Flickr?
They had to be uploaded to Perseids, and in this particular case, we had to choose, of course, pictures where the user put it under a Creative Commons license, right? So. Right. It happens on Flickr that people lock that. So in those cases, we just put comments, translations, that sort of thing.
Okay,
but
so
yes, we did have to have that extra manual process. We are working on an interface where it's self-serve and the user can upload their images. That is not functional just yet.
Right, right. So in the meantime, if a student on the SunoikisisDC course wanted to do this exercise, they would have to select some images from Flickr, check that the images they've selected have Creative Commons license attached to them. They're the ones that say some rights declared rather than so some rights reserved rather than all rights reserved, and then they would have to ask you or ask us to upload it to Perseids for them so that they could do the annotation.
That's
and then
correct.
when the annotation's published, then they can put the link on Flickr, linking to the public.
It's it's published as soon as it's in Perseids, really. So it doesn't even have to be accepted to the board or whatever. They can just put a link, and that will be active.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's one. So that's one possible exercise people could do. I see that Anise was asking I think exactly the same question there. So hopefully that's okay. So the other thing I was just going to suggest is that that's one possible exercise. The other exercise that we've suggested for this is an exercise that Pietro put into the page for this class, which is there. But rather than me showing it, maybe Pietro would explain, talk through that very quickly. Just what students might do if they want to do this, and are there any steps like those that we just talked about in Perseids, where the students would have to ask someone to upload something for them, or anything like that? So what are the steps they would need to do to get this done? You've probably explained it all in here already, but
I can go through it. That's no problem. It doesn't for this exercise with the Wikimedia Commons tool, there isn't any requirement to have anyone else do some work. It can just be done there. There is already a group of inscription that we've selected and packed up from the epigraphic database in Heidelberg, which need this work to be done, so that there isn't also the search part of the work to be performed. So if one wants directly to go and find images that need that work, they can go to that category. they will need to create an account in Wikimedia Commons, but that's useful for many other reasons, of course. So not just for the exercise. And then there is now the publicly available search by image service of the Eagle portal, which is also linked into the GitHub page with the overview of this class. And once they are logged in and they've identified the photo, they can still go back to the Wikimedia page and edit it, but the photo will be already there. There is perhaps something to be said about how to enter that category, which follows some templates. So there are in the discussion page of the category some suggestions on how to enter the template, so that the user or the students doing the exercise might enter just the identifier and directly create a link into the Wikimedia Commons page for that. Of course, there isn't the markup text in there. It's just providing the identifier, which is rather easy if the inscription can be identified. And there are then links to the CIL and then epigraphic categories. It is very important to enter those categories with the format that has been used by others. So when I have identified that photo, I know it's CIL to 167. Then I go there, edit my category list, which can also be done with tools to facilitate this process that are offered by Wikimedia Commons, and enter it exactly with the format that is suggested by that Wikimedia Commons community. So just doing it the way other people do it. And that's the part of it that that can be done straight away. The translation alignment instead, if of the text I want to provide a translation, I'll have to do that process either by Perseids, which is available into the Eagle Media Wiki. So going to the Eagle Media Wiki and then adding a new translation via Perseids, and then logging into Perseids with a Google account, for example. And that translation will appear automatically because of the Perseids integration with the Eagle Media Wiki into the wiki. And because it is in the wiki, it will also appear automatically into the Eagle portal if there is a text attached to it. And I think that's it. Did I manage to make it less clear than it was in the description? Or did it help?
It's helpful.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, good. So, so as always, if any students are doing any of these exercises, obviously their local tutors will support them out. If any local tutors need any further help with this, they can of course get in touch with us, I presume, to get more guidance on exactly what's going on. And we'd love to hear, if you have done any of these exercises. We'd love to hear which ones you've done and how you got on with them, especially anything on Flickr that might not, we wouldn't necessarily see that you've done it. It'd be great to hear about it.
Yeah, I don't know if there are students. I have also to say that the Hangout today is full, so we have 10 participants. Other people are following us on YouTube, and so please, for people on YouTube, you can't join the Hangout because it's full. We have 10 people, but you can put comments on YouTube, and then yes, definitely. So you can get in touch with Debbie, Marie-Claire, and Pietro, and try to use yes, Anise. So thank you. Yes. So not only students, of course, but also other professors and scholars can try to use these tools. And I would like to add one thing about Flickr, because I think it's very interesting in the sense that we have a free open tool and we can use it for different purposes. We have seen how to use it with the students. So students can go there and try to work with the pictures. They can use it when traveling, of course. There is a big issue about taking pictures of inscriptions or monuments for copyright reasons and other things, but still it can be a good tool for annotating impressions and things when traveling. And then for citizen science, why not? So people can contribute that citizen scientists can work with these objects using Flickr. It's an open, free tool. They can put their annotations, so this is, I think. And then maybe one day scholars will use really these tools for their annotation. So I think it's a very good example. So we have the tools for annotating objects, in this case inscriptions, sharing them, discussing them, and linking them to other tools, other platforms, and other resources. So again, integrating resources, integrating communities, scholars, students, teachers, citizen scientists, and so on. So I think that today we have seen different tools, different kinds of alignment, and different ways of working, and different communities that can contribute to that. I don't know if you agree, but I think it was a really great thing. And yeah. And this is also what we are trying to do with Sunoikis. So we are putting all these tools online. You have the videos, you have the class outlines, you have links, assignments. So we want to involve really many communities.
Yeah, I'd add to that. It's I agree. It's great that, for example, that Flickr can be used for this. Flickr was not designed for this purpose. It was not designed for academic work at all. It's a social network. It's social media. It's certainly not designed for epigraphy or archaeology, but you know, it can be used in this way. They have an API that they have this function, the machine tags that can be queried in that way, and so it can be used in all these ways. And it's very valuable and very cool that it can be used in all these ways. We do have to be a little bit careful that because it wasn't designed with us in mind, those functionalities could change. The Flickr could, or Yahoo, who own Flickr, could change the way their API works. They could remove the API altogether. They could cease to support machine tags, so that any functionality we built on top of that ceases to exist. Yahoo could decide to fold Flickr. They could decide that it's not a profitable part of their of their web empire, and it could disappear. That almost happened 5 or 10 years ago. There was an outcry, and they didn't dissolve it, but they could at any point. So unlike the other platforms we've talked about, like Perseids and Eagle and IDES, which are academic platforms, which we hope they will stay around because they have a commitment to. Some of these other platforms, might not. Now, of course, Yahoo is a much bigger company than Eagle or MediaWiki or the Duke Collaborative for Classics Computing are. So they're much less likely to go bust than any of those other companies are, or to run out of funding in 3 years' time and have to close their servers down. But by the same token, their strategies are, their policies are not strictly academic ones. So it's great that we're doing all this work, and I do go in and tag inscriptions on Flickr, and I'm glad that other people do. But we've all got to be aware that if that's the only place where we store that information, that annotation, it could disappear. As it could disappear in MediaWiki as well. But hopefully there'd be
I totally agree, Gabby, and this is a fundamental point. Yes, of course, we have to be very careful, so we don't have to use this tool for... we need other tools, professional tools or academic tools, but I think that we can learn using these tools. As scholars, as a humanist, I said, I come from a traditional background. I learned to work alone. You are a humanist like me, you understand what I mean. So we can use these tools to learn. To try at least, but then definitely we have this responsibility, so to build together other platforms and standards that are stable, reliable, where we can put our stuff and share it. So I think also as teachers we have to use these tools because our students use them. They use Wikipedia, they use Flickr and many other tools. Yes. So they have to learn to use them, but I totally agree with you, Gabby, they have to know that yes, they can disappear. So
I think the solution is not that we need to try and build a platform that is more stable than the one built by Yahoo. That's foolish. But the thing to bear in mind is that we spread our work in many places. Our work is, in any case, we almost always open license our work so other people can take it and borrow it. We put our stuff in online repositories and so forth. So the more we spread our work around between multiple different imaging hosting sites and things like that, the less likely it is to go, to disappear. Because yes, Flickr might disappear tomorrow, but Flickr and Google Images and Wikimedia Commons aren't all going to disappear in the same year, unless it's for a different reason than economics. I think it's a nuclear meltdown in California might get rid of all three of them, but that's
there is some hope.
Losing our inscription annotations will be the least of our problems if that happens.
Yes. Okay, so we still have 5 minutes. Other questions? So we have people in the Hangout. Please join the discussion. And we also have 9 viewers on YouTube, but I don't see it.
I have a question if nobody else has one.
Yes, of course.
Are the images queried via the Flickr API, which I haven't used, reworkable? I mean, once I query that image via the API because the API gives me the opportunity to query via the PHI machine tag. Can I then do things with that image, or it's just a pointer that I get?
I don't know is the short answer. I don't know if you do, Marie-Claire, but I suspect that the main thing you get back from the API is the URL of that image.
Mm-hmm.
And if you wanted to do something with it, you would then have to to fetch that image using its URL, which is usually it's transparent to know the URL of the image information and then the URL of the actual image behind that. So I suspect what you'd have to do if you were writing an interface that was going to build on that is query the results of the API to, in the first instance, look at the license to see whether you're allowed to get it, and then in the second instance to get the URL of the image itself from that, download it, and then transform that in some way, I think. I don't think the API, for example, allows you to mechanically add comments or add tags or things like that. I think that would be too open to abuse on the Flickr side.
Mm.
But like I say, I'm sort of speculating. I haven't tried that. It might be worth asking the people at IDES who I think we're planning on doing stuff with this.
It's just a question that came to mind. I've never used Flickr. I've used these the Wikimedia images, and they are exposed by this IIIF protocol, and it's very handy because if you do know the URL, then you can just do things, which are very nice.
But presumably, when you say you can do things, you can get back the image in various formats. You can get that something you can't write to the Wikimedia database by querying the API, presumably.
No.
That again would be too open to abuse, wouldn't it? Sadly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. So I think that today we also had a very interesting discussion about various things. So we still have 1 minute. I don't know if there are questions. I'm looking at YouTube. So anyway, I think so. We had a very rich session again, and next week we will talk again about images because we start we have 2 common sessions, one next week and then the following one about 3D scanning and imaging and 3D modeling. So it will be really very interesting. So I think that now, yes, it's 6:15. So I want to thank you all for participating, for your support, for your contribution. So Marie-Claire, Gaby, and Pietro, really thank you for what you have presented today, for the class outlines. We have many, many, many things, so thank you. And yes, and thank you also to the participants and to the people who are following us on YouTube. Okay, so thank you. See you next week, and well, good night, at least here on this side of the Atlantic. Okay, see you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.